Welcome to episode 228 of the Disorganized Club podcast. My name is Alex. I'm joined, as always, by my constant co-host, Cam.
Hello.
And we're a pair of auto-based players. Play just about anything and everything you can qualify for. Talk about decks, tournament stories, just about anything to help you and ourselves get better at Magic.
For sure.
That's the game plan.
Why are you calling me constant? I'm a very fluctuating, variable type of guy, you know?
Well, you are my constant co-host, though. That's the thing.
I am here constantly.
Yes.
But I'm dynamic.
Okay. True. Speaking of things being constant, Standard this past weekend, SCG, Strixhaven Championship qualifier went down. And we have the same format as last format. No changes at all. No new archetypes.
Kind of impressive.
Yeah. We've mentioned how Strixhaven has been the least impactful standard set that maybe we've ever had, to be honest. I'm trying to think of another standard set we've had since I started playing Magic that had less of an impact than Strixhaven, and I can't think of one.
On standard? No, this one has had the least impact I can remember, I think, ever. Like, there's always at least a new archetype or new cards that get adopted, something. There's like 1 to 2 copies of Strixhaven cards in sideboards of these standard decks. Maybe.
Yeah.
The main decks are all the same. Like, it's diverse. It's a good format if you're not tired of it, but it's the same. This, you know, what's kind of funny here? So Strixhaven is a college, it's a university, whatever, mage school, and it's really embodying the feeling of I went and got a degree and I don't use it.
Yeah, true. Yeah. I mean, like, here's the thing about standard. If diversity is the most important thing to you, then yeah, the standard is fantastic. But if like you want to have a churning metagame with new decks, or you know, just play with new cards at all.
Yeah, if you wanted to brew, or if you just wanted something novel.
Yeah,
that's not really here.
This ain't the format for you. I mean, and it is pretty disappointing because, I mean, we've been suffering for Throne of Eldraine's mistakes for a long time now, almost 2 years, and it's just really disappointing that, like, we're this far into it and we're just it's the same cores, playing the same cards, like nothing has changed, and it's just boring, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that exciting phase of brewing in the first few weeks, like, didn't even happen. It wasn't even like people tried other stuff for a bit, and then it settled back into things, which is kind of what happened in some of the previous releases. Like, people would try wacky new things, and then someone would bring the adventure creatures to a tournament and everyone would go back to those.
Yeah.
I don't even remember that happening.
It didn't. It didn't happen.
So, like, yeah, I don't know if everyone just recognized right away, or if, yeah, whatever happened, this has been a very, very long standard format.
Yeah, I mean, there's one more set until rotation. We are how many months away? We have May, June, July, August, September. Yeah, about 5 months.
The fact that rotation is coming up is the saving grace. Because otherwise, like, what if we got Groundhog Day'd and just every standard format was a repeat of the last one?
Yeah, honestly, I never thought I'd say this, but I kind of wish we had that faster rotation back right about now. Honestly, I don't think anyone would be mad if WotC was just like, hey, you know what? We're going to rotate Throne of Eldraine early. 4 months early. Here you go.
Yeah. Throne of Eldraine right now, I don't think people would mind too much. I don't know. Even if it's a good decision and most people agree with it, I think it's a bold claim to say no one will be mad.
Okay. All right. Yeah. You're right. I'm underestimating Magic players.
I see what you're saying.
Proficiency to get mad at anything. True. But when I say I don't think anyone would be mad, I'm specifically talking about me, myself, and I.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they were doing fast rotation for a while. They were trying to run Battle for Zendikar or something, right?
Yep.
And they reverted it because people were complaining that it was financially taxing on having a paper card collection. That was the main reason they stated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And would it be as taxing on digital card collections?
I don't think so. I mean, our digital card collections don't actually, it's just a money pit already, right?
But that's the thing. It's 100% a money pit. You can at least flip paper cards. There's a secondary market. So maybe it would be even worse. Maybe they can't bring it back.
I don't know, man. Just give me something different.
I mean, okay, the real reason here that we're lamenting about rotation and early rotation and rotation schedules, it probably isn't even rotation sin. Maybe they should have just not made a set that would dwarf everything else in standard for its entire lifetime and have it unfortunately be the first set after a rotation.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually an interesting discussion. If we had only been dealing with Throne of Eldraine since, I don't know, when Ikoria came out last year, obviously we would have had to live through the whole ban cycle of Oko, and honestly, Lucky Clover and Escape to the Wilds would probably still be legal, but based on the timeline that they existed before they finally got banned. But yeah, a lot less excited about the super overpower set being the first one in the cycle, which means it's legal for the longest. It's a very good point.
I wonder if they ever planned that, or if this was just a mistake, because it's kind of set up so that happens, or it makes it more likely to happen, because core sets are always the last thing. And this is kind of backwards to me, right? Because core sets are the last thing to enter before a new set causes a rotation. They're always the last set in a standard format, in a big format.
Yeah.
And the idea behind a core set is to make staple cards available for standard. So then wouldn't you want it to be in there the longest so that the staple cards are around for the whole time? And then that would also mean that your low-powered set, which core sets are, is the thing that's sticking around for the longest, which makes it more likely for your format to update as you print new things.
You're making a lot of
feels
real
like core
good
sets
points.
should cause the rotation.
Yeah, you're making a lot of really good points, Cam.
All right, well, whoever from WotC is listening, you can have this idea. It's yours.
It's
my gift.
Free of charge.
Free of charge, but keep in mind, you can check us out on Patreon. You can sub to us on Twitch.
Yeah. Check out our website, dwc.gg.
Yeah, all your DWC needs.
Yeah. While we're doing plugs, our sponsor, wizardtower.com. Strixhaven's out. You can go get your hands on that paper product if you are planning on playing formats in paper other than standard.
You don't need them for standard. The paper release made as little of an impact as the digital release did on standard.
Yeah, very true. But yeah, we can briefly go over the results from the SCG. So we have a win rate matrix from our good friends at MTG_data on Twitter. Love the stuff they put out. Lots of 50% win rate decks. All the same decks we've seen before. One new, I don't even know if you would call it a new archetype, Boros Winota, making the list for the first time in a long time. But
yeah, the deck that actually got an upgrade.
Yeah, not particularly a new archetype or anything. Naya Clarion Spirit, adventure package featuring Clarion Spirit Showdown of the Scalds, having the highest win rate among decks in this win rate matrix, but it also is the least represented deck at only 51 copies. Sultai Ultimatum, 52.9%, 278 copies across all these events. So I think from looking at this, we can say that Sultai Ultimatum is probably still the best deck in the format, with it being the most represented and still having this very high win rate. And tons of it.
That's fair to say.
Tons of it in the top 16 of the SCG event as well. Notably, too, It is the only deck that is playing new cards in its main. Only one.
It's got some Quandrix Cultivators. Is there anything else?
Quandrix Cultivator and Professor Onyx. Only deck with new cards in its main. So, that's exciting, I guess.
Yeah, there's, some changes. Some things are going on.
Yep. Yeah, very true. So, I'm not going to bore any of the listeners by talking much more about Standard because, like you mentioned earlier, we've been talking about this format for 4 months now already. So,
a long time.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I see in these numbers, so like most of the top decks here have 51 to 53% win rate, which considering it makes me feel like they go about 50% against all of each other. And then like, even though, 270 some Sultai decks showed up, the other category at the bottom of this list is still 500 decks. So there's still a bunch of oddball things that people are bringing. People are going to bring brews and, whatever they think is fun. So I think the fact that the good decks are slightly above 50 is probably just from preying on some of these not rogues, but errant strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the fact that they're all about 50% against one another, except for maybe not a bit higher, makes me feel like we know it's stable because it hasn't been changing. This sort of reinforces in my mind why it's stable. And so I don't expect to see any changes.
Yeah. Rogues took down this entire event, going undefeated through the Swiss and the top 8. Rogues featuring one Test of Talents in the sideboard as the only new card in the 75.
Must have been why it went undefeated.
Yeah, I think so. Big pickup for this deck, definitely. Actually, I'm kind of memeing, but with how popular Sultai Ultimatum is, it actually is a pretty good pickup. So...
Mm-hmm.
Only one copy though, so maybe not that good. What do I know?
I played one run through the standard metagame challenge when it was up on Arena because I had, finished some drafting and wanted to play something else. I got 2 wins before I lost, but the reason I mention it is I was playing Sultai Ultimatum because it was the top deck on Goldfish. And in one match against Rogues, I got to Test of Talents, their top decked into the story, and that felt great.
Oh.
Just knowing that, they don't really have any more outs anyway.
Yeah, sign me up for that. That sounds nice.
Test of Talents is good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, what did we have that on our top 10? Was it number 6?
I don't remember. Something up there. It
was in that ballpark. Who knows? All of those cards just, yeah.
They're all worthy of a 6.
Yeah, very true, very true. All right, well, let's talk about an actual exciting format, Historic. We had another Insight Esports 5K this past weekend, taken down by Luis Salvato with Rakdos Arcanist. Now, I think this is an interesting deck to talk about a little bit because in the event, there were 187 players. 4 people played Rakdos Arcanist. Luis Salvato was the only player out of those 4 who got wins. Everyone else,
0-2 drop.
And Luis Salvato won the entire event. Now, I played his deck on DWC Versus yesterday. We ran it through a combo gauntlet, a bunch of interesting combo decks in Historic. Went 2-2. Definitely were some interesting takeaways I had on the archetype. One of which being that I felt very short on Graveyard Hate. I also felt really short on removal for big creatures. Now, aside from that, the deck did feel reasonably good. And looking at the metagame spread from this event, the most played deck was Dimir Rogues. And let me tell you, that is definitely a good matchup for you. I was playing Rogues on ladder a little bit this week, and playing against Rakdos Arcanist did not feel nice. Did not feel nice at all. I'll tell you that. So I like the deck choice for that reason. I'm really surprised that only 4 people played this deck in this event. And despite Louis Savato being the only one who actually got any wins out of the 4 people. I do think this deck is actually like really good, and I think it's tier 1. I'm kind of confused as why it's so few people picked it up.
It might just be that it's going to be next weekend that it becomes really popular, because I definitely felt like, a few days ago, the hype around the format was these green-white company decks that have picked up. Everyone was talking about, like, Magma Opus had sort of broken out, was it 2 weeks prior? And so it was still sort of the hype of like refining Magma Opus Gearhulk decks. Like Temur Phoenix has kind of been figured out, or versions of Izzet Phoenix. So like those are the decks that I had in my mind. Rogues with Brainstorm had proven, and Memory Lapse had proven how good it was. I wasn't actually thinking about Red Black. It wasn't a deck I feel had gotten much hype.
Mm-hmm.
But it coming in and, attacking the format, doing very well, I imagine it's going to be very hyped up next weekend.
Yeah, I mean, we are 1 week from Dimir Rogues winning the event, right? And now it comes back this past weekend as the most played archetype. So maybe we're in for a shift like that for next week. Yeah, I mean, the Rogues deck had a good win rate in the event and put 1 copy of the deck into the top 8. Gruul Aggro still continues to be a pillar of this format. Hasn't picked up new cards in a really long time, but the deck is still very good.
It used to be a standard deck, and it's going to keep acting like a standard deck. No new cards.
Yeah. I mean, it only put one copy into the top 8, but there was 3 of them in the top 16. Paulo Vitor lost a win in the last round.
2 in top 8, aren't there? 5 and 8.
Oh, there's 2. There's one at 5. I missed that one. So 1 more. It performed even better than that. But yeah. I expect Gruul to maintain in numbers, because I mean this deck, it just continues to be really good. It's a great ladder deck if you're looking to rank up quickly. Yeah, and then one deck I did want to talk about a little bit is Izzet Phoenix. So early on in this format, I was talking about how I wanted to play Temur Phoenix with Abundant Harvest, and finally, Temur Phoenix making a top 8 here. Zan Sayed. He was the one I originally got my original list from, because Cam and I tried to brew up Temur Phoenix and I just couldn't figure out a good list. But Zan was the one who originally played Lovestruck Beast as another green card for the main. Notably, the
Lovestruck Beasts are not in the list he played this weekend. I think it's just Abundant Harvest main that's green.
Yeah.
In the sideboard, though, there's 2 Clothis and some Cindervines.
Yep. So clearly, Abundant Harvest is good enough that being the only green card in this main deck is worth it. I think the next best performing Temur Phoenix deck was 24th place, Andrew Beckstrom, and the list looks pretty much the exact same. No Lovestruck Beasts, just Abundant Harvest in the main.
That just really speaks to the power of Abundant Harvest. Because, I had the same reaction you did. Like, if we're adding green, we should add something else that's green, diversify, make it worth the splash. But apparently you can just splash 1 card.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious if Temur is going to take over as the best version of this deck, because it does give you the better sideboard cards. And, I mean, Izzet Phoenix is still performing well. Put 3 copies into the top 16. Curious. Yeah, because whenever I was playing Temur on ladder, and when I played it on versus, like the mana base didn't feel bad, right? Like I didn't feel like moving from straight blue red to Temur was that high of a cost, and the consistency that Abundant Harvest gives you is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, this feels like one of those changes where, because it's only 1 card, it's not even like they're different decks, really. The game plan is the exact same. Their threats are the same. Answers are the same. The way they play is the same. It's just a different choice of cantrip. And so if it's worth it to add the green for Abundant Harvest and it's better than something else, then it's one of those situations where I feel like it's almost a strict upgrade. Of course, you're going to have some portion of games where your mana base betrays you because you're being a bit more greedy. But in most cases, it feels like, why stick with Is It?
Yeah.
At all. Like, it's not doing anything different. You're just playing a worse card.
Yeah. So I'm curious to see what the adaptation is for next weekend's events, seeing now that Temur Phoenix performed the best out of all the Phoenix strategies in this tournament. But yeah, I've been watching Zan stream a decent amount, and he streams this deck a lot, and it looks good. I've really enjoyed playing it as well. So I'm curious if Abundant Harvest can keep this deck in the top tier of the format, because I did talk a little bit last week that I thought Is It Phoenix might not have the staying power in the format, but maybe Temur does.
Yeah, that's interesting. Abundant Harvest, we're kind of unassuming at first. I played it. I haven't played it much. I played it on DWC versus, what was it, 2 days ago? Yesterday? Because it was in 2 of those combo decks. It was in Temur Marvel, and it was in green-blue Taken turns. And yeah, like that card just feels super impressive. Like, it makes How Many Hands so much more keepable. You can just like draw into gas when you need it. Yeah, I like it quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and aside from that, Selesnya Company continues to just consistently top 8. Like, there's nothing really too flashy or exciting about this deck, but it just keeps winning.
Yeah, I guess should it be compared to other decks? Like, is this the Humans of Historic? Is that what's going on here? Like, some hateful taxing effects on efficient creatures used to attack people?
Kind of, but not really. I don't know. It's a weird one. And I don't know what's interesting about this deck is that against the decks that you think would typically prey on just green-white creatures, I think have a lot harder of time against this deck because they just have so much built-in disruption between their Spellbinders, the Redains, Thalias in the sideboard that we encountered this a couple weeks ago when we were streaming, but like typically you would think just straight up control decks would have a very easy time with something like this, but that doesn't really play out that way, which is really interesting. And also, what this deck also has like a pretty big nod in its favor is that it's one of the few decks in the format that can just free roll Rest in Peace as a sideboard option. Whereas a lot of, there's other white decks in the format like Jeskai Control that rely on having a graveyard for cards like Torrential Gearhulk or Search for Azcanta. But Selesnya Company just easily gets to play Rest in Peace. And when we're looking at some of the best performing decks in this tournament and just in Historic in general so far, Is It Phoenix strategies, Rakdos Arcanist, Dimir Rogues. Like, these are all decks that rely on graveyards existing for them to do well. And Selesnya Company being able to free roll the Rest in Pieces with no downside for their main strategy, big nod in their favor for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it seems like a control deck should be something that dunks on these creature strategies. But like, what control decks are even showing up? There's these Jeskai control decks, which are the Magma Opus Torrential Gearhulk, which are kind of closer to like pseudo combo, trying to set that up. But spot removal against a deck that is casting Collected Company isn't going to be super good. I mean, it's fine, but Collected Companies can get around it. And so you kind of want to wrath these creature decks. But the first list I'm looking at here, the one that was in 13th, it has 1 Settle the Wreckage and 1 Wrath of God. Like, to make room for all these Magma Opus and the Brainstorms and the Planeswalkers, they're just not playing that many Wraths. It's a bunch of cantrips and spot removal.
Yeah. The 14th place list, it looks like it's playing 1 Wrath and 2 Doomscar, so only one more like actual Wrath effect, and then it's playing an Anger of the Gods as well. So this player a little bit more prepared.
Yeah, a bit more prepared, but it's not like decks we've seen in the past where it's like there's 4 Extinction Event and a Languish and more in the sideboard, or like you used to see white decks that had 4 Wrath of God and a Shatter the Sky and like something else.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, very true. Definitely there's a lot more counter spells, a lot more 1-for-1 removal spells, and less just board wipes in general.
So I think that's a nod for the Selesnya Company deck as well. And maybe even, well, I guess it's probably a nod to Gruul as well. Maybe that's why Gruul has been doing good. Things like Temur Phoenix or Arcanist or Rogues, they don't flood the board as much. They sort of have 1 or 2 efficient creatures, so they're a bit softer to the spot removal.
Yeah. Yep, very true. But yeah, that's kind of where Historic is at right now. It's still the only format I'm actually playing on Arena. It's like I have 0 interest in Standard, haven't played any games since day 1 of the set release. But still having a real good time playing Historic. So
yeah, I mean, it got new cards and it's going through the usual process that we see in Standard, right? Like even as we mentioned it, Opus decks came like into popularity, and then Rogues did well, so Rogues picked up in popularity. Now we're seeing sort of an Arcanist cycle. It's going to take a few weeks, then maybe it'll settle down, and there'll still be stuff to talk about, maybe some innovations, and then a new set will come out. So we get to follow Historic as it grows up and be proud of our child.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think there's another MPL Rivals League weekend in 2 weeks. And I'm pretty sure it's going to have Historic, because it's normally split Standard and Historic. So in 2 weeks' time, maybe we'll have a more set in stone format for Historic, or maybe there will be something more exciting that happens when those players all dive into it. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I wonder if any of the like classics of Historic are going to come back. Like, is Goblins actually that poorly positioned against any of what's going on here?
I honestly, I haven't played against Goblins since Strixhaven came out. Yeah, it's like completely disappeared.
But I don't see why.
I mean, maybe it has something to do with just there being more counter spells in the format.
Yeah, maybe your Rogues matchup's not good if you're trying to resolve Muxus and you're just getting memory lapsed.
Yeah, right. Like, there's just a lot more counterspell decks in general right now. And yeah, maybe it's just they're just having a hard time getting through that. I don't really know.
Yeah, like Rogues might be hard for you. Maybe is it Phoenix? But are they even playing many counterspells?
Mostly just really. Like memory lapse, but I was thinking more in the sense of like all these Jeskai control decks, right? Because Jeskai control, like in this event, I think it was.
Yeah, but even they're just playing 4 memory lapse.
Yeah, it was the second most played deck. Well, like Jeskai's control is playing memory lapse. They're playing what's the name of that card? Saw It Cummings in a lot of scenarios. Like this deck's playing Saw It Cummings, Censor, Memory Lapse, Commit Memory.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see that. You're maybe a bit soft, but they're also low on Wraths. So like your early game setup might stick around more easily, so you're not as reliant on the Muxus. But even if you're a bit soft to the counterspells in the format, things like Rakdos Arcanist can't do anything about top deck Muxus, or cards coming off the top with things like Conspicuous Snoop. Selesnya Company, Gruul Aggro, like you should just be able to Goblins these things if they're popular.
Yeah, you would think. I'm curious. I don't know. Like, I don't think how many people play Goblins in this event. I'm trying to find it in the list here, and I just can't find it.
It's not even here.
Wow, did actually 0 people play Goblins?
Golgari Elves, Golgari Midrange, Grixis Combo, Grixis Control, Gruul Aggro, Gruul Company, Gruul Control. None of those are Goblins, and those are all.
Wow. That's crazy. That's actually insane. It was
like such a mainstay of the format. It was
yeah.
At some point maybe the best deck.
It's completely absent. That's actually wild to me.
Lux is taking some time off.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, let's transition to our topic because I think we're good to go on these formats now.
Yeah, we're all caught up. So this topic, I'm going to preface by saying it's a bit more of a nebulous topic. I'm not so certain about. Okay, so I have some ideas here that I want to sort of it's more of a discussion than a topic, perhaps. Let's consider it that way. It's just sort of some things I've noticed, but I haven't really thought through completely. But it's about style in Magic. And how I don't think there's much discussion around style. When people talk about, what should the right play be, or what decision should I make, or how should I draft a format, or whatever, like, in my experience, the discussions are very, I don't want to say concrete, I don't want to say black and white, but they're very much like each person claims that you should do this. Like each person provides one answer. This is what you should do in this situation. And you never really hear like, if you're playing in this type of a style, you should make this decision. But if you want to play in this other sort of style, maybe consider whatever. And so just kind of wanted to sort of talk through like how I do think style it exists in Magic. And I think it's something that, even though it's not appearing in conversations, it has a real impact on people's gameplay. And if you start considering it more, especially when talking about Magic with other people, you'll sort of recognize where their advice is coming from and how you can better adopt it. So just to set a ground level of what I mean by style here, it's very easy to recognize in other games, and it's talked about a lot in other games. And most other competitive games have sort of a universal piece set, I want to call it. Like in chess, it's actually symmetric. Everyone has the same pieces that all move the same. In StarCraft, if you play Zerg, every Zerg player has the same units. They can all do the same thing. Sports teams, I assume, I don't watch sports. Maybe Stelly can fill this one in, but sports teams, every hockey team has people in hockey sticks and skates. But I'm sure that at some point you've heard like maybe some hockey team has a very offensive style and another one has a very defensive style or something.
Yeah.
I assume
yeah. Players play more aggressively or more defensively. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so when there's this like baseline piece set that people are using in a game, it's very easy to notice the ways that they use them differently. And I think this gets muddled a bit in Magic because the primary way that a player's style is sort of expressed is in deck choice. Like you do hear in coverage of Pro Tours and in coverage of events, like, this person is known as a very good control player. They always bring control decks.
Yeah, this player is a mono red player, a mono white player, like they play aggressive decks only.
Yeah, exactly. Autumn Burchett is known for Ember cleaving people. Whoever else, Shota Yasuoka is known for bringing blue-black, regardless of whether that's good or not. And this, I think, is the very baseline level of style, and everyone's aware of it. It's not even so much like it already automatically gets considered, like which decks are good, which are coming in and out of favor. That's what we just did for the first half of the podcast. But I think that there's more to style in Magic than just that, which is what I wanted to discuss. Because I think if you restrict yourself to looking at players who have the same piece set, like if you compare two mono red players, I think they can play very differently. And I think this can mean that like advice that one of them gives might not be applicable to the other unless they completely shift their style of playing. So actually there was some event where Paulo, PVDDR, everyone knows Paulo. Paulo was playing and won Worlds or something. He was playing mono red and watching coverage and listening to the commentators talk about his games. He was playing very patiently with a lot of his cards. He wasn't just flooding the board. He was making his opponent deal with the few threats he had and then deploying more and, sort of saving his burn for when it was really important. Just a very patient mono red style. And it worked out for him, but that's not necessarily how people always play mono red, right? Like some people just think you should maximize your damage, get creatures down as fast as possible, push in the damage, then they'll die, then you finish it up with burn spells. And I don't think that one of these is necessarily better than the other, or that one is wrong and one is correct. Like, it might be format dependent, it might be matchup dependent, but even outside of that, like, they just have different strengths and weaknesses, right? Like, if you flood the board to push damage and your opponent doesn't draw their wrath, then you're going to get in a bunch of damage and you're probably going to win that game. And I don't think that's like an undue risk. I think it's just, I am willing to win the percentage of the games where my opponent doesn't draw the wrath, or that's what I want to win, and I'm going to be behind if they do draw it. Whereas if you play more patiently, you are good against the hands where they draw a wrath early, but you're not so good in that, maybe they drew a bunch of spot removal early, and so your patient play gets stopped. And so this is sort of what I mean by style. There are different ways to manage risk, different ways in which you can use your resources, which have different pros and cons, get punished by different things, and both, I think, are valid. And I don't really see this come up when people are talking. Like, if someone asks, would you keep or mull this hand, or what should my play be here? No one asks, like, what's your play style? What's your goal? Everyone just says, like, oh, you should do this. And they're saying that from their own implicit style that they've developed. And it often leads to people disagreeing, not realizing that, like, they're sort of disagreeing about things that you shouldn't directly compare. So that, I think, is interesting, and I think people should maybe keep it in mind more. So, the mono red example.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Or go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I've been ranting for a bit. If you want to throw something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that when speaking about style and play style in Magic, it's more complex than just. It's obviously more complex than just saying, "Oh yeah, I'm an aggro player, I'm a control player." It's more of the combination of deck choice / how you approach risk.
Yeah, exactly.
On a very base level.
Yeah, and so here's a very concrete example of something that I actually noticed and kind of inspired this conversation. Well, there were sort of two things that inspired this conversation, but this was one example. In a game I was playing, it was a limited game, where, okay, so I'll set up this scenario. My opponent had a Sedgemoor Witch, and I couldn't kill it the turn they played it. And over the next turn or two, they would cast one spell, make a token, and then pass. They had learned prior in the game, and so I knew they had like Spirit Summoning and something else in their hand. They had extra spells that they could cast, and they had the mana for it, but they were never tapping out. So the read is pretty obvious that they have a protection spell for their Sedgemoor Witch. So I think it's safe to assume that there is this protection spell that you need to play around. And the way the game was going, this witch had made enough tokens, and my board wasn't very impressive, that if this witch is allowed to continue making tokens, I will definitely lose. So these are sort of assumptions. We're pretty sure that our opponent has a protection spell. If the witch doesn't go away, we'll definitely lose. And at that point, I had a removal spell I could cast. And the options I was considering are sort of two different styles of how you want to manage your resources. And I don't think either one is necessarily better than the other, or one is wrong. But the first style you could consider is that, if the witch doesn't die, you lose regardless. So you might as well try and kill it now. If they have the protection spell, okay, you were going to lose anyway. You can just concede. It's not going to die. And this will work. Say maybe the player was bluffing their protection spell. And this has the advantage that, you're making the decision now, so they're less likely to have more draw steps to find a protection spell if they do have one. Maybe it gets the protection spell out of their hand and you draw another removal spell right away, and then you can kill it. So that's option one. Like, I can't beat it, so make them have it. The other option I was considering, kind of a second style entirely to how you manage your resources, is to, again, recognize that if the witch stays alive, you're going to lose. But that because you're so certain they have a protection spell, it won't die unless they tap out. So in this style, you just know that if I try and kill it now, I lose. So rather than take the 100% loss, I can wait and take the 99% loss, commit to the board, do other things, and maybe they get greedy and tap out, or maybe they feel they need to commit more to the board to answer whatever I played. And so I don't try and kill it immediately. I just wait and probably still lose, but if they tap out, I can kill the witch. Both of these feel very justifiable to me. Both of these, I think, so the reason I think that they're equally valid is that Like 99% of the time in most games against a competent player, they will have the same outcome. You will lose to this Edgemore Witch. Like in Style 1, they protect it, you lose. In Style 2, they never tap out. You can never kill it, you lose. So if they have the same outcome, then, both of them seem to be valid, but it's a very different mindset on how you want to use your resources. And it's a mindset that can have different outcomes in different scenarios. So this was, I think, a neat example of somewhere that there's just different styles to how you want to approach this scenario. And it's one where I can definitely see people getting into an argument over which one is right and which one is wrong without even considering that they're both valid because of different goals or different approaches.
Yeah.
So that, I think, was a cool example of style just in gameplay. And I think it really highlights how the risk management portion can be stylistic, which, as we said, in Constructed is the biggest place that this secondary sort of style shows up. Sure, you pick your deck, but then how you manage your risk within that deck are these sorts of decisions. In Limited, there's a closer analog to this universal piece set. Everyone starts with 3 packs of random cards. Like everyone goes in with nothing. So therefore, the differences in how people draft should be equally apparent in how, the different openings different chess players pick, or the different builds that StarCraft players do. Like, it should be pretty obvious to recognize different draft strategies as stylistic differences between players that are valid. But again, I never see this. I'll see people post pack one, pick one discussions, and people will just say, well, this card is definitely pack one, pick one. And then someone else will be like, oh, you're crazy. That card sucks. Like, this one is pack one, pick one. Like, I can't believe you wouldn't take whatever card. And of course, some of this is, inflated because it's online discussions or discussions, whatever. But that's like the general vibe I get from these kind of questions and discussions I see. Is that, like, I don't think I've ever heard a response of being like, I would pick this card because I draft a bit more patiently in this format, and I think the late game cards are quite good, so I would take it to prolong the game. But my friend likes playing aggressive, and he would take this, and that's fine as well. And so there's probably much more to be learned from other players if you kind of keep this in mind. And this part of the discussion was inspired by this. There was a bunch of us, my friends and myself, drafting in Discord one night. And I had been drafting kind of Strixhaven, sort of focusing on good creatures. I was ignoring Learn because I felt it was a bit dirtily. And I had done very well. I had a bunch of wins throughout the day. And my other friend was saying that Learn was the best thing you can be doing. You need to prioritize lessons and learn cards very highly. You just prolong the game, use the card advantage. And that's definitely how you should be playing. And neither of us was really willing to admit that both could work and both were just different styles, because I felt so strongly that I had figured out the format at that point, and he had been playing a bunch in which his strategy had been working really well, and later he came up. I'm not sure where the data came from, but there was a table he showed us where apparently just the more learning you have, the more likely you are to win, correlated from some sort of data. So I'm probably wrong on this point. He's probably correct that learning is worthwhile, but neither of us even acknowledged that it could have been a stylistic difference. We were both just arguing that there was a correct one of them was a correct way to approach the format, which is kind of insane. Because the more I think about it, the more I realize that people do have incredibly different styles to approaching draft, and they're all fine. Like Adam would play very slow, very dirtily draft decks, and he knew how to play them and how to use the resources so that he could just eventually loop something, or eventually, sink 6 mana into some mana sink that would ping his opponent for 1, and he would kill his opponents that way. And he could do this in formats where there are good aggressive strategies as well. It doesn't mean that the aggressive strategies are wrong. There's just different style available. And so, yeah, I just think it's a aspect of Magic that doesn't get talked about a lot. And connecting to our past episode, our most recent one, where we talked about the experimental phase of learning a draft format, that process I described of like playing some games, seeing what's good, then playing some drafts with, what has impressed you in mind and developing an understanding of the format. There's no reason why this needs to produce the same outcome in every person. Like, it's going to be very chaotic in the sense that small changes to those first few games you play are going to lead to different understandings of the format. Like maybe you didn't play against a very good black-green deck in your first few games, so you didn't prioritize drafting black-green and you developed some other strategy. Or maybe there was poor variance and the first deck you drafted did well because your opponents were bricking, and so you continued drafting that kind of archetype and you found out that you could tweak it to be good. Like just based on these small changes, people are going to reach different considerations of what's good in a format, and both of them can be right. Like we had a prolonged discussion about Strixhaven Limited. We argued about Learn. We also argued a bit about Access Tunnel. My friend claiming that Access Tunnel hadn't ever been good for him, and me saying that I would pick it quite highly because sometimes it just wins games. But of course, this is almost like the perfect example of a card that is going to matter entirely on your style. If you draft like my friend was, slowly casting sort of a lot of learn cards for small effects to draw a card to sort of pile up small effects and build up this advantage over a game, you're not often going to be in scenarios where your opponent is stabilizing and you need to push 2 or 3 damage to kill them, which is what Access Tunnel is very good at, which that was the style of decks I was drafting. I was ignoring Learn, I was playing to the early game more, and I was pushing damage. And so Access Tunnel seemed amazing to me because, my opponents ended up at 5 and I just killed them over 2 turns before they could use all their Learn cards. But we were just disagreeing on whether it was good or not in the format. We weren't even like acknowledging that it could be good for one of us and not for the other because of how we were drafting. So I think this is interesting. The moral of my story, of my sort of somewhat half-structured rant here about style, is that keeping this in mind when discussing what's good in Magic and when trying to learn a format, when even playing Constructed, could really help give perspective on why people are recommending certain things, why people have the opinions that they do. Even self-reflection, recognizing your own style. Like, why do I not like doing whatever? Why do I think this person's wrong about whatever? Can, shed some light on why you make the decisions you make, how you could perhaps maybe better play to your style, etc. And so, as a final piece of warning, just because like you're trying to learn mono red and someone is very good at playing mono red doesn't mean that you should just pick up their advice. Like, obviously they're going to have some good general advice, but make sure it fits with how you want to play mono red. If your style has been working for you so far and someone recommends something that seems crazy to you, maybe that's because they're just playing with a different style. And I see this, I'm sure, Stella, you've been part of these experiences as well. But we used to have nights where like we'd all be hanging out and we'd sort of be collectively drafting. One person would be piloting Moto or Arena and everyone else is sort of just talking and suggesting plays or, doing whatever. And oftentimes in the early part of a game where there aren't many decisions, whoever's playing will just be playing. Everyone else will be socializing. And then it'll come to some point in the game where there's an actual couple of decisions, and important decision 1, like person A's opinion will win and the group will do that. And then important decision later on down the line, someone else will suggest what they would do. That's what will happen because you're sort of playing as a group, and it will just immediately cause you to lose because it contradicts player A's play of like resource allocation and stuff. I don't have good examples of this in mind, but even things like whether you should have blocked or not like 3 turns prior. Like maybe someone plays in a style that uses their life total a bit more flexibly, and so they didn't block early because they wanted to, save a removal spell for something big. And then they go to the washroom and another person's like, oh, well, we just need to use this removal spell now to push damage because we're behind in the race and so we can get ahead in there. And they suggest a more tempo plan, which now makes the having not blocked early make no sense. And so you just get this like scattered clash of styles that leads to wasted resources and lost games. And it doesn't mean that either of those players' plans was wrong or invalid. They just don't sync up with each other.
Yeah, no, totally.
So yeah, that's my rant. You can learn from other people, but keep in mind that like not all disagreements are real disagreements. There are stylistic differences. They happen in every other game, and I just think people should acknowledge them more in Magic.
All right, well said. And with the end of that rant comes the end of the episode. Thank you all for joining the club this week. Make sure, as always, check out our sponsor, wizardtower.com, for all your Magic single needs, and you can find more content from us on our website, dwc.gg. You definitely check us out on YouTube as well, as we'll be posting our DWC versus videos every week, and even some more content. So definitely keep that in mind. Check that out if you like the stuff we put out. And however you listen to the show, whether it's Podbean, iTunes, any podcast app, leave a review, rate the podcast.
All valid styles. All those platforms, valid
all
styles.
Valid. As long as you leave a review and rate the podcast, 5 stars preferably.
Yeah, that's the only valid play.
Yeah. On that note, thanks all for listening. We'll catch you next week.
See ya.